Oh, is it? Did it say 10 a.m. did it? Oh shit, okay. Well, it was 9:30. I made it 10. Oh well. There you go. And here I was scrambling and like going, ah, shit. And then I've got half, and it's typical Taya, isn't it? That's absolutely on brand for Taya. And also I could have, do you know what? My hair isn't done and my hair's shit. I like the title card too. I'll tell you what, Midjourney is so great for like, they've got a new setting, which is like weird setting, which is like the, what you call it, a parameter, which is like, weird, and you can just set the weird level from like up and down. And I was like, yeah, and it you just put in your words and you go tinfoil hat, dude cooking with gas, and like, you know, you play around and, you know, like various styles and stuff. But obviously I do see, the thing is, I do have a creative objection to, or, you know, like a somewhat of an objection to just passing it off as, you know, like as my own work. So obviously defacing it and doing some fun things with it, you know, obviously then you get around copyright, that not get around copyright, but you, because copyright exists to protect artists, right? So I do the right thing and I make it my own. I adapt the work. Let's put it that way. You know, so I like the title card too. It's one of my favorites. I think of all of the things, it's probably one of my favorites. Hang on a sec. Let me just turn this TV off because it is a distraction for everybody, because you see they're trying to read it. I'd like to actually, do you know what I'd really like to do is get this set up to the point where I can have things on that screen, and so I put the audio out of the headphone jack into here and have it play. Like, you don't need, like for the type of thing that I show, you don't need to see it. It's mostly talking heads. And then I can do react videos to like YouTube videos and stuff. It'd be really cool. But obviously, like, it was supposed to be a simple setup. I haven't, since I set this up, I haven't used the fucking full station that's over there. And it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, that's the problem. But anyway, good morning. I am a bit early, actually. I think people were. So we'll do some chatter for a bit. Hi, Matt. Thank you. Let me actually, just give me a second, because I'm early. Let me fix this chat. I think I know what it is. There we go. Taya reacts to things. There we go. So I will put it on. Let me just fix it. Hang on. Width. Good enough. Okay. But this one is actually, because I might, the problem I think with me not doing this full time is just, like relaxing. We're just talking. Oh, your food's on the way. See, we're having a good time. But also this is a weekend thing where I'm just sort of talking about stuff. But, we might get some clips or rants out of it, right? But I do want to start talking more about Australian stuff. But this gas cooking, nuclear stuff, it is a really good example of how you can, like, Australian policy and a good Australian policy and good policies, and how the United States culture wars just sort of comes down and infects our politics to a point where people don't actually differentiate and they don't realize like what the fuck they're saying, and they're just spreading propaganda, and they're just basically mouthpieces for like American oil companies. And it's like, what the fuck? So I thought that this I'm going to talk about gas and nuclear. I'm so proud of the name of this stream. But this is the reason why, right? Hang on, let me get it open. All right, here we go. Let's look, the definition of cooker, right? Australian slang for anti-vaxxer. They're usually against mask mandates, lockdowns, and state international border closures. Many believe in outlandish conspiracy theories. Can often be seen posting misinformation on Facebook, telling people to do your own research, and protesting in the streets against tyranny and for freedom. Freedom's funny as well. Hang on, I'm very proud of this. Freedom often votes for One Nation or UAP, but not always, right? So it comes from cooked, which is a more polite version of fucked. So cooker is funny because obviously they're gas cookers. And if you've been following the gas thing, right? What's been going on, which I'll try to explain a little bit. Obviously, I'm not a journalist. Obviously, I'm not somebody who, I don't have expertise. I don't have a dog in this fight really, other than being, interested in people who are just becoming basically mouthpieces and puppets for forces that there is a theme, which is they become like mouthpieces for things that they wouldn't necessarily be a mouthpiece for if they actually paused for a minute and went, you know what, this is actually pretty fucking reasonable. So one thing that I try to do is look beyond what people are reacting to. Like in an ideal world, I'd have a daily half-hour show where I was just saying calm your twits, look at what was trending, and then sort of, okay, let's go deep dive. Unfortunately, at the moment, I can't do that. But I'll do it as I can. But that's kind of my intention, right, is to go, okay, well, what parts of this are propaganda? What parts of this are funded by various forces? Where's the truth? What's the process? How can you get involved in a way that's not just schizo posting on Twitter? That sort of stuff. Because I want people to know how much power they actually have. And you do actually have quite a lot of power if you actually are a single issue person and you care about things and you want to make a difference. It's not Twitter, not social media, okay? You can participate in the process anytime. And I did talk about this with the previous stream, how a consultation process, you're able to get involved. Like you can write stuff. It's where you put your energy and time. And I understand, and this does link very much to that sort of Gen X slipping into nihilism. What's the point? It's that learned helplessness. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of learned helplessness coming out of the pandemic, where people just feel defeated, and rightly so. Okay, so I'm not saying that you can't feel that way. I'm not saying that there's not a valid reason to feel that way. Lockdowns really fucked with everybody. It fucked with everybody. It was horrible. But at the same time, this slipping into the sort of nihilism, black pill sort of learned helplessness, which is a person who's not using their adaptive, they kind of just stay in the funk, and they just decide that there's no point. They can't change anything, that bad things will happen if you do it. Well, no matter what you do, that you're unsuccessful, that you don't have the skills, that that government sucks, that what's the point? Like that's kind of a form of like learned helplessness, right? That's a term from psychology, where rather than use adversity to build resilience, you use it to become defeated. And, I would say that you suck the fucking energy out of the room, right? And I try really hard it's very easy to fall into that learned helplessness thing, I do, but I don't stay in it long. Like I usually stay in it for a couple of minutes or maybe even overnight when stuff's really bad and I get overwhelmed. But then eventually I tend to just bounce back and bounce up and start and go, all right, well, there's no point moaning about it. What can I do? I don't want to be unhappy. Okay. But like, this is the thing about like post-pandemic, which I do think that, you know, the government really does need to be looking at, as part of their postmortems and as part, so to speak, and as part of their sort of debriefs and you know, they're obviously going to be doing a royal commission into how it was handled. But I imagine one of the recommendations will be a greater investment in like mental health for people who have PTSD as a result of the pandemic. Like that's a valid and reasonable use of resources, because it does. It affects people's like ability to do anything. And if you know anything about complex PTSD or PTSD, like I know Matt said on the chat that he has it. So like but there's a lot of people who have complex PTSD. Okay, whether you think it's real or not, who cares? You have no opinion. You have a Twitter opinion. It is, it's a set of symptoms that, need treatment. It's a syndrome. That's what you need to think about. It's not about whether it's real or not. Unless you are a psychological researcher, you have no position to determine whether someone's, experiences are real or not, right? But if, I think that what we're seeing is the outcome of, decades of really bad dehumanizing policy through like austerity and through privatization and through, an ever-growing bureaucracy of private enterprises that are basically there for the fat government paycheck, but not necessarily they're not there for the right reasons. They're there to, and obviously some of these inquiries and like these, when you're talking about Australian politics, the goal of the Australian government at the moment, the elected Labor government, who, people have a tendency to forget and give ScoMo a go, and it's like, or give the LNP a go. That's not a good reason to vote out a political party, okay? But the Labor Party right now, their job is to try and fix shit, okay, that was broken. This is the cycle that always happens, which is that the ALP end up on the back foot because the LNP's job and the coalition's job is to strip their country off, strip the country for parts, sell those parts off for the, to their mates, give their mates all of the government contracts. And unfortunately, they end up signed on to 3, 4, 5-year vendor contracts. And it's like, these things are very difficult to undo. Okay. They take time. And the problem is, and this is a political science 101 type of deal, okay, which is that's the environment that you work in, that's just that's the landscape that we work in, which is that we've got 3-year and 4-year terms depending on whether it's like state and federal. So every 3 years, 3 years is just enough to forget like how bad the previous government was, and just but too short to actually implement anything sort of systemic. So the ALP's job right now has been, for the last year and a bit, and last 18 months, has been to put these foundational policies in place and these programs in place for change, and they take a long time. It takes a long time to steer a heavy tanker and change direction. It takes a long time, and a lot of these government vendor contracts, for example, they're locked in. It's because I'm sitting really fucking still, Matt. So Matt said, camera stay more stable. It's because I'm sitting like this. I'm frozen. I can't fucking move. I'm sorry. I want to fucking. Do you know what? As I realized that as I'm getting older, my teeth are actually getting gaps between them where they didn't before. And you're going to look at them now and go, oh, but I actually realized that now I'm approaching 45, my teeth are starting to drift apart, like in here. So I want to try, when I can afford it, which I want to be able to get this stuff fixed, because it's driving me nuts and it's really distracting on the thing to get these gaps sorted. Because I've always just had fairly decent natural straight teeth. Thank goodness, because I was born poor, so I wouldn't have been able to afford braces. But like, thankfully I've been gifted with straight teeth, but I've noticed that drift. Speaking of teeth, old man, let me guess, you didn't go to the dentist? Am I correct? Let me guess, Matt didn't go to the dentist. Did you go to the dentist, Matt? You didn't. He's very quiet all. Oh, look, you're very chatty all the time. Yep, there we go. Don't fuck me. Stitch in time saves 9. Okay, if you get that fixed, okay, now it's gonna be, you're gonna end up having to have full-on surgery and everything. Okay. You went to 4. No, you didn't. Stop fucking lying. You didn't, and you've got good American health care. So you should. The teeth is where they get good. When you in America, they got. Yeah, you didn't. So anyway, but I'm trying. I think one of the challenges with is that Australian politics is very niche. But trying to find. I think people are sick of American politics. But the thing about American politics is that it actually affects us. Like in subtle ways. And I think that might be a good way for me to, first of all, educate Americans about different political systems if you show up, right? And understand that, I think doing a little bit of empathy exercises, like I don't believe. Okay, all right. Well, then you're allowed to participate in my chat because I was about to kick you out for not going to a dentist. No. Well, that's all right. Anyway, so I'm glad that you actually, because I know that as much as I joke, I know that you actually don't like the dentist. But I don't like the dentist either. Okay, it's horrible. So I need to practice what I preach. Anyway, but one thing that I would like to do a little more of, if I can, is because I actually, as much as I make fun of Americans, one thing I do believe is that they're actually genuinely curious about how the world works. They're just not really exposed to a lot of that information, and they kind of come in and they, like Americans are like puppy dogs, like they're enthusiastic and they mean well, and they just don't know. And so I think that there is a nice opportunity to use American like culture wars examples to educate people both in Australia, UK, and and you can apply it to any country, which is how American culture wars and how American media sort of affects like Australia on the ground, where it's not just the internet. And I think that if I do that, people might understand why I am so focused on X, for example, or focused on the internet and the media when it comes to the internet in particular. But also, I've been reading. It's also the what was I going to say? Oh yeah, but it's also the I don't know. Trying to reach people is obviously a big challenge. Okay. Oh, that's right. So yesterday, because obviously, I'm doing my Juris Doctor, right? And I go on these sort of, it's like, okay, well, what would it do for me to be able to, what would I need to be able to practice law in the United States? Okay. Because a big part of my job that I see moving forward is, media and arts law or speech or, particularly media law, and being able to do that here. I mean, you have limited influence, okay? But being able to go maybe to the United States and influence sort of tech law at the tech company level and to get them thinking about certain issues. I think people really don't know how different our systems are, right? It's the morning and I'm just going through all of my Sunday morning fucking shit. Sorry, but the thing that I had surgery for is still there. Okay. Anyway, but it just takes a while for my system to agree with me and my drugs to kick in, stuff like that. Sorry. Give me a second. I'm so fucking thirsty. So anyway, but I think people really have not, but people just take these things for so yesterday I went on a bit of what would it take to practice like media law in the United States? What units do I have to do? I don't see how I could do that because you need $100,000 to be able to pay for 2 years of tuition. It's between $30,000 and $70,000 US to be able to do your LLM, which is a Masters of Law. And it needs to be done at, and then you sit the bar. So you've got to do a handful of core units, like I'm doing right now. I'm doing those sort of core units at the Juris Doctor level, It's not undergrad. So it sits between the master's and undergrad. Okay. And it's like, yeah, so it's like a graduate degree. But you've got to, in order to get registration with the legal board, you need to have ticked all of these boxes and do it, right? So what I'm doing is going through that process, ticking through, I've done criminal law, I've done employment law, I've done this. I know how the system works. I know how to be a lawyer. Okay. But you got to do that in the United States as well. So, but I have been toying with tech law, media law, arts law, where they overlap, right? So it's, but like the difference in legal systems, I think people really underestimate. They really don't realize. Like one thing in Australia that what we actually don't have. Well, first of all, we don't have a guaranteed right to privacy, right? So we can't go with the privacy angle like they do with the United States. But even with our defamation law, you can't just say allegedly and be off the hook. Right? In America, you've got a lot more ability to just get away with saying whatever the fuck you want. Like I think that, and I did allude to that the other day when I was talking about sort of this idea of hate speech or, those sorts of things or online harassment. And I think people are really like, they're going from they're assuming that certain things are true when they're not. Okay. And I think that a lot of people are basically like, well, the law shouldn't exist. Therefore I'm going to it's like, well, that's not how it works. Okay. You've got to obey the law as it stands. And if you are, again, circumventing that process or going, well, the law is stupid, well, then you're going to have to be prepared to go to court. You're going to have to be prepared to get that stuff done and, fuck around and find out. Like, I think people really need to, I think I can sit in that space where it's like, I don't think you realize that, you can't just say, like, comedy isn't a defense. Okay. The fact that it was a joke is not a defense in Australia, right? It's not a defense. And so like if you say, so basically, the real test is basically, whether in the eyes of an ordinary person, that person's reputation is down, whether it's, yes, truth is a defense. Yes, in arts law, there is it's sort of a case law understanding, common sense, right? A common sense understanding of the fact that something that is comedy or art or whatever has a higher higher status than just your everyday speech. We understand that. But do you want to be the case where do you want to spend 10 years in court, okay, to try and to make that, you get what I'm saying? Like there's not a lot of case law around this stuff because a lot of people go, you don't want to be the test case. I mean, I want people to be the test case, but, do you really want to fuck around and find out? Because it's a gamble. You think you've got free speech rights and all of this stuff, okay? And you just go off abusing people and saying whatever. And it's like, well, if they have the right amount of resources to be able to, the law isn't about like who's correct a lot of the time. A lot of the time it's about who's got the money to take you to court, right? But the court is a very funny thing about, we ruled a lot. I think this is, again, where I can maybe help. And I'm sorry I was probably a bit early. So if people are expecting me to, not that there's a great crowd, but, I was a bit early. But if we're talking about, things like misgendering people in their mentions, okay, like we've got these laws coming that, you're going to end up, but even without those laws, okay, so even without those laws, okay, like the anti-vilification laws and those sorts of things, even without those, the law's not on your side. Okay, so you got to be careful. Okay, be careful. I'm saying you don't have as much speech as you think you do. Now, with my last stream, I talked about this sort of definition of hate speech as determined by the CCDH, right? The devil's in the details, right? I don't want Americans determining what, especially American and UK, determining that swear words are hate speech. Like the details matter. And anyway, so that's the whole point. So everyone has freedom of speech until it turns out they don't. And I'll tell you now, if you're going around saying, technically, well, I have this, I think you should just not assume that because a lot of our like stuff is based on the exception. Okay. you get away with being a mouthy cunt on the street. You go there and most people go, the letter of the law. Like Americans are very good at wriggling out of stuff with the letter of the law. But in Australia, we've got a different threshold and a different standard, okay? Now, obviously, there's lots of details behind this. But if you want a lot of our legal stuff, okay, a lot of our legal ruling is not around the wording of the law per se. A lot of our wording and a lot of the way that it's interpreted is around what would be considered like reasonable person or common sense or, whether you're being malicious, right? Like being malicious or malice, right? That's like a big part of it. And so if you're not just getting out in a technicality, if everyone around you knows that you're behaving with malice, okay, it doesn't matter. Like it's like I think you need to understand like some of these like things, which is that you're not in a good position if you're like going and misgendering and harassing people online and calling them names and making claims that you can't back up in court. It's I think you'll find that the law and legal frameworks are very different. And I thought that maybe what we could do is talk about that here. But I also want to talk more about how American culture wars and American nonsense and media and Murdoch Press particularly have this agenda that, stops your thinking and terminates your thought, okay? And the arrogance in which they do that, okay? So a lot of these oil companies in particular, right, they are very acutely aware of the online tribes. They're pretty confident that they can get people to do stuff, okay? Now, if you remember back, I'm sure that you can, hearken back to the pandemic when everyone bought the toilet paper, okay? That's been, if you think that hasn't been studied and they've figured out how to move people and how to get people doing things, and that like the anti-vax movement in particular, figuring out how to mobilize people in a way that they think that they're fighting for their freedom or they're fighting a thing, but they're actually just showing up and being used as soldiers, right, to do whatever, okay? You don't underestimate that power and that the possibility that you're being used as a soldier in a war that if you were told to go to a rally about fossil fuels, okay, or if you were told to go and pick on climate activists, but you were told that you were going there to fight for your freedom, okay, or fight against lockdown. So let's say you cared about lockdowns. We can talk about lockdowns now, okay. So let's say, let's say that let's use this as an example. Okay, and that's the reason why I call it gas cookers as well, because they're related to each other. So let's say, like most of us, okay, you didn't like the lockdowns, okay? There were a lot of people who are left, right, centre, around, green, ALP, non-partisan, independent, academics. People did object to the idea of the lockdowns, okay? Now, you'll see in the way that Australia handled the pandemic. Now, I think if you're American or UK, the way that it was handled, I think I've talked a lot about how this stuff was handled, the way that this stuff was misrepresented overseas, which was that, all of that Australia has fallen bullshit. Okay. It's not true. It's just we do things differently. Or this idea that Australia is authoritarian or whatever. And it's like, well, no, that's where the propaganda kicks in. When you start talking about absolutes in that fashion, that's when you need to sort of, your red flag goes up and says, that's that, and also like the source, where it's coming from. If you're getting all of your culture wars news from a person, but they're also saying something and linking all of these things together, if they're linking gender to lockdowns, to what's the other, to, we need to talk about nuclear, if they're linking those things together, which I think that's the job of IDW, right, is to sort of make connections to things where they might not necessarily exist. And if you're not thinking about case by case, and you're going, oh, well, I oppose this thing, but I am for this thing, but I oppose this thing, but here's why I oppose that. If you've got one issue that's a vote-changing issue and you're sort of going, I think that's a really good sign that you might be going down the rabbit hole, is when you start getting to a point where, again, it's that nihilism, that learned helplessness, where it's all a big thing. It's all just a big, powerful thing. Now, obviously, socialist analysis, if you misunderstand socialist analysis, can get you into that mindset very easily, because you will feel like, the capitalist class is just going to, there's no point. Unless there's a revolution, there's no point. But that's to fundamentally misunderstand it, right? And you've seen me like, well, I will defend Elon Musk, or I will defend a billionaire when they get defending, like when they need defending, or I will, defend the working class, and I'll call them out and I'll, say, you fucking idiots. But the professional class, the professional middle class, everything you have to take on a case by case basis. And that stuff is hard work. That stuff takes, I spend how many hours a week? 12 hours a day. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, thinking about this shit and doing all the reading. And, it might not appear this way, but I did like 2-3 days of reading on this gas and nuclear and the propaganda and like the pipeline. I did so much reading, on this stuff, and people really don't understand. But of course, the cookers have all the opinions because, this is a fucking, let me just rant for a minute about this, which is this idea, and it's just a general trend. I'm not having to go at any of the people, but this idea, like, this is the problem with fucking Twitter, or my X, right? Which is that you could say something like, I can't remember what I said. I said something like, I can't remember what it was. It was just something, and I said something, and it was authoritative. It's like, I've done the work, I just did a thing where I was like, it doesn't work this way. And then someone replied and goes, yes, I had that debate on my podcast. I agree. And I kind of went, you think those things are equal, don't you? And it's very strange. And it's not that it's snobbery. It's just that they're not equal. And again, it's very frustrating to see that people, this Dunning-Kruger shit, like this content factory of people who think that because they skim read something. This is just a really big unintended consequence of the internet, which is that I think that people are now more confident and more empowered to think they're experts in things. And when they haven't actually done more than maybe an hour's reading maximum, or facilitated a conversation where they heard out the arguments. And it's like, that's really strange. It's a strange phenomenon. And that's why I try not to step out of lane. And so I've had a little bit of a back and forth with a friend over nuclear. So she's just, she's working for Colette, which is obviously, obviously going with the nuclear, obviously going with the oil lobby talking points, right? That's fine. Do you, make money, do what you got to do, okay? But I'm also going to debunk it. But, she sort of lands in Australia with the nuclear stuff. And it's like, Australia's making judgments about our position on nuclear power, but straw-manning that debate as though we're just being hysterical and it makes no sense. And it's like, well, no, that's not actually correct. You've been here 4 days. You need to understand how our system works, and the history, the fact that it has been we've been flogging that dead horse for fucking 50 years. We've done several inquiries on it. We have got several, the legal and political, culture, first of all, but also the framework and what is required to get that up and running. It's got nothing to do with the pros and cons of nuclear, and everything to do with the viability of a project like that, and also the interests that are pushing it and all those various things. Nuclear has reached a point where battery storage and hydrogen in particular have superseded that technology. That's like, and it's very similar to the NBN, where for the first time in my life, and probably the last time, Tony Abbott had a point, which was that there comes a point with the NBN where when you're putting fiber to every home, and you're putting fiber, you're laying physical cables, for the internet, where Wi-Fi will get so good and so comparable that so what you need to do when you're doing talking about major works, and nuclear would fit under that category, right? Nuclear would fit under the major works. And so it's got nothing to do with, it's easy to sit and do a year 5 essay with no understanding of the implementation or the history or anything like that. Okay. And go, okay, well, let's kick this off. And then it's like, well, no, because of the logistics of actually, it's got nothing to do with being pro or anti-nuclear. But what they do is they then strawman everyone as like some hippie who's strapping themselves to a tractor at Jabiluka. And then it's like, well, but do you even know what Jabiluka is for a start? But they don't. But also, those things have got history. And we have, we're one of the sunniest places on earth. We have the technology, we have all of the natural resources, but also it's not even about like the pros and cons of nuclear. At the end of the day, most people are neutral on it. Okay, some people are against it, but again, we've signed anti-proliferation treaties. Okay, we are actually famous in the world for our stance on nuclear power and nuclear energy, and like being pretty much a leader in that area. And there's no compelling case to commit to a 15-year project on something where renewables, the technology of renewables is getting faster and better, and like they're cleaner. And it's like you're straw manning and you're lying about it. Okay, and you're just lying about the left and saying that everybody who has rejected this is just emotional. It's like, well, no, that's not the reason. The reason is because it takes 15 years to build a nuclear power plant. Okay, we've done it to death. Every 3 to 5 years, some fuckstick turns around and says we should consider nuclear, and then they look into it. Like John Howard did a fucking inquiry on it. South Australia did an inquiry on it. New South Wales did an inquiry on it. Victoria did an inquiry on it. We've looked at like whether we should look at being more flexible in terms of our anti-proliferation, blah 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 blah, changing the law, because we've actually got bans on nuclear. Okay, like from the 70s there's a whole process. And when you know the history and the fact that even if we all agreed right now, bar the Greens, okay, let's say that there was a 90% support for for nuclear energy. Okay, there are even some Greens who support nuclear energy. That's the thing you don't understand, is that there are Greens who support this, there are Labor who support nuclear, there are all of this. There's people who actually, and it's like, well, we're not arguing that you don't have a point. It's easy to write a Colette column or a fucking column about this, about the pros and cons of nuclear energy, but we've moved beyond that. We're talking about, well, okay, what's your plan if we do? Okay, we've done this. We've done this before. Okay, we've had the arguments. We've decided it's unviable. The technology has actually moved on to a point where that technology can be used, like, obviously nuclear fusion and those sorts of things. Fusion will play a role down the track. Okay, so we're looking at these things. But what's your plan for how to implement it? And Australia in particular, when you understand our landscape, our projects tend to be, and even the people who are pro-nuclear have said we'd need to commit to better project management. There's all of these barriers that need to be committed. It's just, there's all these barriers that need to be overcome, okay, in order to implement. It takes 15 years to build a power plant. The one of the countries, the main country that builds nuclear power plants, guess what? We've got sanctions against them right now. That's Russia. You can't do that. Okay, well, that's going to delay the project further. Okay, so if you just do a basic thing, and also what we would need to do is change every law in every state and repeal the anti-nuclear legislation in every state. And guess who has the balance of power in the states? The Greens. So it's not going to happen. The Greens are being fuckwits over the housing bill right now. Okay, do you think they're going to not be fuckwits over nuclear? Like, what the fuck? It's like, yeah, you can talk about the pros and cons all you like. It's not happening. Also, the major companies, they're all backing hydrogen. So what's your point? And I know that, okay, splitting hairs, this is where I don't get, I sort of glaze over. I don't understand the intricacies of the technology. And I know that there's some, there's hydrogen, nuclear, all that fucking, I don't know, boring. But the thing about the internet is that they quibble over the benefits of various power, and some scientician on fucking Twitter turns around and says, well, technically it's more clean. It's like, well, yeah, you're leaving out the part about the nuclear waste. Oh, but technology will fix that. Yeah, but technology's fixed the need for nuclear too. Why are you leaving that part out? That battery storage is actually really good, right? And also, you need to be healthily skeptical. Do you know why? Because the people that are pushing for nuclear just happen to own the uranium mines, okay? And yes, we export uranium. That's the one exception that we've got for nuclear. But, you know, it's like, think it through. Think about what interests are pushing the nuclear thing, right? What interests? They want to push an expensive, long project that they personally benefit from in terms of, like, you know, uranium, demand for uranium, okay? You know, all of these things. It's like fucking just basically like who benefits, like what's the next step? Assuming that I say yes, assuming that we say yes to nuclear, well, what's your plan? Okay, it's easy to sit and go for and against on the internet. It's like, what are you, 5, are you 10 years old? We're taught how to do that essay in primary school. For and against, remember we all had to do that. For and against the death penalty. For and against that. It's like, well, the world doesn't work that way. Even if you are for things, even if you think it's the best solution, that solution doesn't always get up. Okay, that solution is not always practical. And we've reached a point with nuclear where it's fucking done and you're flogging a dead horse. And then they're like, we need to have a debate about nuclear. We've had it hundreds of times. It continues. You keep bringing it up. You are in a meeting that could have been an email and everyone's trying to leave the fucking meeting and you're going, oh, I've got one more question. And then it fucking starts for 3 hours. You're that guy. Nuclear people are that guy. It's done. It's settled. Okay. Hydrogen, solar, mostly. Okay. Hydroelectricity, right? All that shit. It's done. Technology's moved on. Just, you know, uranium, like you're going to have to get out of your uranium mines. I'm sorry. Or keep selling it to China or wherever the fuck. Okay. It's just not practical. Okay. And also nuclear power plants need to be near the water. And if you're near the water building a plant, it may as well be a hydrogen plant. Like what's your fucking it's just not viable. Okay. It's not about being scared of nuclear. That is actually it's that same bullshit with that. You know, it's basically like it's gaslighting, so to speak. There's a pun. Gaslighting, right? Hang on. So Matt said something here. So Matt, because he probably knows more than me because he's an engineer and I just glaze over at this shit. And he's on the other side of, he has that other part of his brain. So let me have a look. So solar proliferation has progressed so far in Australia that the energy companies have pushed to mandate demand shaping, I don't understand this, to be able to reduce the amount of solar. Sorry, I don't understand the sentence. But yeah, so basically the goal is to put solar on every light roof and sell it back to the grid, right? And you can put battery storage and batteries is the way to go, okay? And unfortunately, you know, a lot of it is just, oh, well, I own a uranium mine and a newspaper. Like if you understand the role that the Murdoch press played in the early days, okay? Basically, it was the idea was that if there was a union, if there was a strike or a major strike or something like that, right? They'd set up a paper to create division to start shit. Okay, I think you need to again. This is where a historical understanding of like what role Murdoch's media empire has played in undermining and attacking progress over the years has played, and it does link to the gas cook thing, and it does link to like what the agendas are, okay, which is that stuff was breaking out in, like, let's say I'm just trying to think, Ballarat, right? Ballarat's one of the most famous places. A newspaper would start, okay, and then they'd start to create and publish stories that were divisive and sensational, and work to undermine that social change and those unions, right? And that was sort of one of those. And again, I needed to fact check that. I imagine that I have misspoken there, but that was just really a lot of the strategy around why these Murdoch papers existed in the first place, was to sit there and operate and spread propaganda on behalf of the mining companies, right? We've got so much power. So the Minerals Council actually is one of the most powerful lobby groups, right? And the IPA does a lot of the research, right? Let me bring that up. Let me bring this up. Hang on. So I have talked about this at length, okay? At length, which is that you need to be aware of big tobacco tactics, okay? Like what they've done, okay? This is the same MO, okay? So where are we? So like here are 5 of the most, so that's basically a whole playbook, right? And it's predictable. And once you're aware of that playbook, you start to become aware of the fact of what the tactics are, right? So like so to be clear, most companies don't engage in disinformation. The deceptive practices that make up the playbook are used by a small minority of companies, which is known to be oil, gas, and tobacco. I would argue pharma use these tactics as well. Like that, you need to be aware of that, where there is a massive global company that they're probably, and that's dying particularly, okay? Like they've been doing this around vaping and e-cigarettes as well. Okay, which is to sort of question. Anyway, but this is the disinformation. So that, 1, the fake, right? So conduct counterfeit science and try to pass it off as legitimate research. And so they've been doing this, right? Right, so they blah, blah, blah. Blitz, harass scientists who speak out with results or views inconvenient for the industry. And a lot of researchers have been under attack for this sort of stuff, right? Now, again, I'm skimming over because it's not the main point, but do familiarize with these things that I've talked about before. The diversion. So manufacturing uncertainty about science where little or none exists. And this is one of those things. It's like that we're in the doubt business. What you need to do is create doubt. And this is why I've said that this sort of gender wars thing is very much, it looks like this playbook, because I know about the playbook. It's big tobacco shit, right? And no matter how legitimate the science may be underneath, you have to assume that when massive corporations that when there is a doubt that this is this may be occurring, okay, you just assume that when shareholder value is the priority, that this may be occurring, okay. And so the attacking of gender critical academics, the people who challenge, like academics who say that puberty blockers may not be terribly safe, all those sorts of things, and like the clear harassment campaigns around those that have been over the years, it's the same thing, right? But Murdoch knows this process, and that's how Murdoch made his fortune, okay, was off the back of fucking mining companies. So the screen, buy credibility through alliances with academia and professional societies, otherwise known as corporate collaborations, corporate partnerships with research, commercializing research, okay? Do you really think that if Exxon are funding your fucking mining project that you don't have to like orient towards Exxon? And the fix, manipulate government officials or processes to appropriately influence policy. Okay, so that's, and they don't engage in all of it, but that's just 101 that's 101 stuff. Okay, hang on, what did Matt say? Demand shaping, basically they can switch off your solar at will. Yeah. So vaping here, by contrast, is knock yourself out. What would you like to vape? Provided you're of legal age. Well, yeah, and that's the problem, is that this is where America brain sort of, but it's also why these things sort of permeate in America more, because they can get the liberty brain going, the cooker brain, which is my freedom. And I had an interaction with somebody on Twitter about the smoking. And I was like, someone who's ordinarily fairly pretty, and I was like, so in Scotland, apparently they are increasing taxes on cigarettes. And he was like, he's basically just spitting out like the talking points. And this is a really good example of that, which is that that labeling and packaging and increased cost and all those things, there's lots and lots of different policy levers that you can pull to like discourage smoking. Also social stigma, you can ban it, you can, all sorts of things. You got to balance those things. And it's the same thing that I was talking about with the law, with defamation law and those things. It's like the law is about, in Australia, it's not about winning zero-sum stuff. It's about balancing lots of competing needs, okay? So like that's the approach, okay? Now, I'm not saying America's not like that, but I'm saying it tends to be more adversarial, more sort of zero-sum. But it's like this deep mistrust of the government, and obviously if it was the American government like right now, I'd have a deep mistrust of my government too. But the American government's not our government. Our government is mostly fairly trustworthy, okay? They're different. We have a different political culture than America. But America, they've gotten, the oil companies have, this is why, cookers are coming out of there. That's why their brains are melted, because they've got so much propaganda, so much disinformation, so much doubt about every fucking aspect. It's very hard to know what's true anymore, because everyone's just sitting there like not knowing what's true. And there's propaganda that I can fall for. I could be wrong. I could be too trusting of the government, and there could be a sinister plot to make us all eat crickets and fucking sit in pods. I imagine there are people who want that life.
I imagine there are people who want to bring that worldview about. But the thing is that government should run interference to make sure that various interests are balanced, okay? Whereas in America, obviously, it's a bit different. But, that be very deeply suspicious. One of the key factors in, now I'm not, see, the thing is, one of the biggest coups, I guess, for lack of a better word, or victories of the big global right-wing, sort of fascistic corporate structures that exist in the United States, those authoritarian corporate structures, right? The real authoritarians, I might add, is this using Stalin as an example of left-wing authoritarianism, okay, which is correct. So totalitarianism, right? Correct. But, things go off the rails. It's just, it's got nothing. They've managed to marry those two things together and create this narrative that fuses socialism and fuses anything that involves a government program with the government trying to take shit away from you, okay, or to take away your rights, or to, whereas the role of government is to balance these things, competing rights, to balance things. And that's been an extremely successful thing in the United States, where this massive mistrust of government, and again, there's lots of evidence to show that that's actually a valid thing, right? It's the reason why 40% of people don't vote. But this has been an incredibly successful thing where they've gone, they've managed to fuse any attempts to regulate dangerous products and reframe them as an issue of choice. Okay, and reframe them as an issue, well, when it suits them, not when it comes to abortion or anything involving anything involving being, having gender affirming, but anything that sort of goes against, but when you actually look at your brain, reframe it and go, okay, big pharma is far right, okay? What they have successfully managed to do, and I'm just, I obviously haven't prepared the correct words around this stuff, so, forgive me, but what they've successfully managed to do is over the period of 100 years is weaponize Americans' deep mistrust of authority, which is a good thing. That's what the nation was founded on. But it was also founded on the fact that, that it was Puritans who fled, and there tend to be, it's not quite that they wanted freedom. They wanted to be able to fucking, be extremists in peace. That's really what it was. They sell the narrative of we wanted to be free from the king, but it's not that simple. Right. Hey, emoji, good to see you, or emoji. But it's good to see regulars sort of showing up. When it's nothing if not diverse. It's nothing if not diverse bugs. But anyway, so but the one of the most successful campaigns, I think, was weaponizing Americans' fear of government and authority, but to a point where it is now malignant, and to the point where you're sort of not really seeing sense, okay? And unfortunately, that's sort of what we've got to undo. That's why you're seeing the brains melting, because the solutions to a lot of these problems are, government programs and government funding and laws and, gun control and, these sorts of things, right? And unfortunately, because people are just so cooked, and receiving so much propaganda where they're just repeating something that's just not even true, that the liberty argument with smoking, that's a deliberate big tobacco. You read the stuff about big tobacco, I can't remember, it's called The Doubt Business. Is that the name of the book? I can't remember. I know, but they did emphasize the fact that tobacco very, very since, quite brazenly have bragged openly. It's well, we're not in the business of tobacco, we're in the business of doubt. And so when they had this unequivocal, consensus that tobacco causes cancer and all of these other things, right? that their strategy was to just sow doubt to doubt that science. And that's happened with climate change. Like, it's come out that sort of, not come out, but it's pretty well known that Exxon knew in the 70s about this problem of climate change, and they actively worked to suppress it, right? They also have, like, we're seeing a lot of these things just come to life where people are being used as weapons because they think they're fighting for their freedom. And they're just repeating like these talking points of these companies. And so when it's fascinating to watch, but it's actually also very worrying, because the thing that makes you free is your participation in the process, like actually engaging in the political process as a citizen. That's the thing that makes you free and powerful, is using your ability, not saying I hate the government and fighting the government. I'm saying, like, working with the government and actually going and exercising your right to, participate in the process is one of the most powerful things that you can do. And that's why I've always been pro-voting, right? Especially compulsory voting. Because for at least 5 minutes, you need to think about, like, all of this stuff that is tempting to, move away from. Okay. So, it's amazing how these ads just stick in our brains, but that's the same with propaganda. So US right-wingers are beginning to associate caring about the environment with totalitarian enslavement. Exactly. Actually, that leads to this article, which I found really interesting. So just so you know, I'll give you a little bit of context. In Australia, this last week or so, okay, Dan Andrews, who is the Premier of Victoria, okay, now Victoria is a single state in Australia. It's one of the bigger ones, okay. You might have heard of Melbourne, or for the Americans, that Melbourne or Sydney. Melbourne is the capital of Victoria, okay. Melbourne and Sydney are the two biggest states. I'm on the other side of the country, and, but we provide a lot of the resources. Anyway, so different thing. But the way that they handled the pandemic is very important here, because a lot of the severe propaganda with Victoria was with the way that they handled the pandemic, which was long lockdowns, okay? We didn't experience those, because basically, I mean, we just went, nah, you can't come in. You can't, you can't come in. And then we just lived our lives pretty much as normal. And every time there'd be a case or whatever, that we'd have a 24-hour sort of, don't go out unless it's essential. And we came out until there was a vaccine. And then once the vaccines happened, then obviously I would argue that was a successful approach, right? Because we had relative freedom. There was no right way to handle this. But the data doesn't lie, okay? And now sometimes you do, and this is another thing where people just completely misrepresent China, and I'm not defending China by any stretch with their authoritarianism and all that sort of stuff. But there is a deep misunderstanding, and it's a very American misunderstanding of the role of government, which is that sometimes the government has to make calls that are authoritarian. That, whatever the fuck that, authoritarian just means making rules and, and enforcing rules. That's what you vote for, is the government to be the authorities on things, right? Again, I know that it's like not really, but people just misunderstand their terms. We don't have an authoritarian government. We have that was one authoritarian policy that was temporary, that was, I would argue, was somewhat necessary. Now, I don't think it was a good idea. I think that they, again, when you think about Australia as things being on balance, Victoria balanced it in a way that was, I think it was a bad call. I think it had unintended consequences, which was that people couldn't work, and people get a lot of value out of working, like not just about like, it's not just about money, but it's about, there's lots of different reasons, but the lockdowns really fucked with people, okay, in Victoria in particular. But it's just, he was, unfortunately, poor Dan, is one of those leaders where he made a call that was probably the more full on that was in Australia, right? Here, our Premier was also called authoritarian because he closed the border. and said you can't come in, right? And it was like, well, you get called. So the thing about you get called that shit no matter what, and there was no good call. A lot of it was acting on information like as it unfolded, and you know that's just how it. Like this is what I think the best way that you could maybe analogize it was, you know, like post September 11th, like in America, people weren't in their right minds. And the passage of the Patriot Act and, you know, those sorts of things where people were reactive and people were, you know, they sort of voted for shit and they went along with shit and, you know, they kind of thought we need answers. People were in that state where they were making calls, and the leaders are no different. Now, our politicians, I think, again, there's a I can't remember what it is. There's this thing in psychology with public trust. I can't remember. I can't remember what the name of the concept is. But basically, the more egalitarian your country is, right? So it's not so much about whether you have politicians or the system of government or anything, right? What it is, again, it comes back to class, which is how far removed are you from your leaders in terms of, like, you know, your life? Like in America, it is very much rich people, elites, Ivy League educated, you know, there are some exceptions, right? But for the most part, you have to be extremely wealthy before you even get into Congress for the most part in the United States, right? And it's about that gap. So the way that people feel about their leaders and like the way that people relate to power, I wish I could remember it. The way that they relate to it, it's actually about the distance. So, but in Australia, our politicians are generally mostly ordinary people. I mean, they're not hard. Obviously, you know, not everybody. Obviously, like, but Pauline Hanson, for example, you know, she owned a fish and chip shop in Ipswich. Okay, but our leaders, for the most part, are not elites. Okay. Now, there has been somewhat of a professionalisation, especially in the Labor Party, but, you know, with lawyers and, you know, union leaders and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But the gap between your average sort of median Australian and a politician is very thin. We're very egalitarian, you know, we're egalitarian. That's the word that you sort of, you know, where we're sort of all seen as somewhat equal. And that actually showed somewhat during the pandemic, when our premier was having press conferences and stuff, and that people are like, hey, Mark, like that's kind of, you know, you would not. And I remember actually there was a press conference with Mark where he got heckled by some bogan walking past. And the press and Mark and everyone just kind of laughed it off. And I sat there and I was like, could you imagine if someone did that in the United States? They would have been shocked. Okay. And that was something where that's something that Americans don't get, is that we don't have that gap for a start. But that's where that sort of comes back to that concept of the consent of the governed. Okay. Or the social contract, where we vote our people. Again, this is these are very aggregate. Obviously you've got a professionalization of the labor, you know, all those sorts of things, right? But for the most part, they're not the same, which is that we know that we could run for office and win, okay? If I wanted to run, I mean, I don't know if I ever would. I might one day, I don't know. But I'd prefer to get someone elected rather than be elected. I don't think I'm electable. But if I found, you know, it's never been a question about whether I could run if I was approached to run. It's always been a question of whether I wanted to run. Does that make sense? Like, it's kind of, I mean, I'm of the view that if you want to run for that, then you know, it probably disqualifies you mostly from it, right? But because I'm a policy person, you can do committee work and shit from the background without the politician part, right? I don't want public life, right? She says on a live stream, but you get what I'm saying. I don't want that. Because that's a burden. I don't think people realize that that's actually a burden. You give up too much. But so Matt said, to be honest, I have a fairly negative view towards Australian politics, informed by my own experiences, but that has merely led me to being disengaged and disenchanted. And that, you know, that's, again, I'm explaining aggregates and cultural differences. I imagine that you'd be a whole lot more disillusioned and disengaged with American politics. Okay. Most people are, you know, a lot, again, it's about who's more, it's got nothing to do with one being rosy. It's not necessarily, you know, like Australia, like every political system has its sort of ups and downs and downsides. Like, you know, China has better health care, but they, you know, in order to and they've lifted their people out of poverty. But in order to do that, you need to be more authoritarian. It's kind of like, you know, these are things, right? Yeah, well, I won't have to deal with audience capture because I don't think that's you know, it's not something. That's probably why I shout into the void most of the time, because I've had people attempt to do that and it doesn't work. So that comes back to the sort of the I don't think me dealing with audience capture is ever going to be a problem, because I've already gone through that where it was happening, and I had gained a bunch of patrons, and then I lost a bunch when I stopped talking about certain things. And then I just, you know, like I've alienated enough of everybody where most of the agenda people won't pay me. Like I've had people who've approached me and said, well, we'll publish your book. We'll bring you up. We'll do this. And you just know that they want me to spread bullshit about China. They want me to spread bullshit. You know, they just want me to spread bullshit, and they want to use me to do that. And I just know that I know they're trying to buy me. I'm not an idiot. Okay, I've had those conversations in the background. Anyway, sorry, I'm really thirsty. I love chomping ice. It's a very annoying thing, but I love it. Anyway, so I'm not saying that Australia is better. I think, and I actually saw this before on X. Jason, oh my God. These nothing worse than tech bros who think they understand like how it's like I've got money, therefore I know everything about the world. It's like, well, no, actually. And he said basically, you think America's fucked until you look at other countries. And I was basically like, well, name one thing, one element of those political systems that you understand that's different, and do a comparative analysis of those systems. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. The thing about political systems is that there's no perfect one. And America has decided that they're the perfect one and told everyone that they're the perfect one. And that is the problem, is that nobody is acknowledging that there is any, there's no perfect system. Now, Australia was founded we had the benefit, and this applies to tech, right? You don't have legacy, right? We had the benefit of looking at America, looking at the UK, looking at various systems, and creating our own hybrid that we thought at the time would be a superior system. And it's proven pretty fucking robust, I'll tell you that now. That's why when people like Australia's fallen, it's like, it literally, so many things would happen for it to fall. And a lot of those things are dependent on America not collapsing. If America collapses, we're in trouble. But a lot of it, we're pretty robust because we've actually put in a lot of the things that we've seen sort of, affect America over the years. Unfortunately, we are building we're building American bases here, which I'm not comfortable with, but that's a whole other thing. Back to nuclear. But so basically, what we're seeing is that, people just really misunderstand, but it's really interesting to see that how successful those disinformation propaganda campaigns are. The problem with the word disinformation is that now it's loaded, okay? This disinformation from the Union of Concerned Scientists, I love the name of that. We're very concerned about things. It's just such a scientist's fucking not-for-profit name. They don't even, we are the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's fucking hilarious. They used disinformation playbook before it became sort of loaded and weaponized, all that sort of stuff, right? This is the old disinformation playbook. But it's these tactics. It's really important that you actually learn these tactics and understand these tactics. Okay, that's the biggest takeaway, is that you need to understand that if experts, again, I'm not saying experts are right all of the time, but there was this big lie around COVID that the left weren't opposing the lockdowns. It's like, well, no, you can look at any, especially the conversation, especially like Jacobin, all these types of, it was like there were people who were saying that lockdowns were a bad idea and anti-worker, and they were going to do more harm than good. There were those voices. And the thing about and this is related to the gender thing and the why I left the left nonsense. They're very powerful because what they do is they will lie to you and say that no one on the left is talking about XYZ issue, okay? And they are. You're just not seeing it. And so, but if you seek it out, you will see it and you will go, okay, no, that's fine. And the problem is that the right wing will elevate and astroturf and push any narrative that sort of supports what they're trying to accomplish, which is, first of all, to make you think that nobody on the left has opinions on anything. Straw manning, using this Stalin, like Roseanne's funny. I've gotten a bit of a funny thing for Roseanne's podcast. It's hilarious because I love Roseanne. I've always loved Roseanne, and watching her journey, for lack of a better word, has been really interesting. But it is funny because she's a real example of what can happen when your brain, when you get cooked, right? Where you sit there watching it and you're like, yep, oh wow, yeah, that's a good point. Not many people know this. Okay, that's an argument. Okay, yep. Oh yeah, good point. No. Right? And it's just like, no, the wrong conclusion. It's like, it's just funny because you just watch it. It's very funny because nah, no, you're not. Oh, yeah, you're right. You end up rooting for her that she's going to kind of end up at the right conclusion, but it always takes a sort of turn. And it's like the building blocks are correct, but the fucking solution is just wrong. And that's your brain on this propaganda, that's what the far right tend to do, is they use these seeds of things that are true and correct and based in something real, and then they turn it into a fucking conspiracy theory that the government's coming to get you and they're going to take away your rights. And the second that you're getting into, they're taking away my rights, and I'll go, well, what rights are you talking about? Which ones? Specifically, which rights are they taking away? And the answer is, well, it's just a feeling that you have rights and you don't want to, and you find that you are actually acting like a toddler who goes, I've got rights. It's like, well, actually, give me your legal argument for that. You don't. Also, that's not what it's about. And that's the problem with a lot of this stuff, is that they've managed to weaponize that emotional reaction to something you don't like as to being about your rights, and they're different things, okay? So like that thing with big tobacco and the smoking, where an increase in putting an economic, using really good choice architecture to try and design make it so that people pay a lot, make a disincentive to keep smoking, right? Make it so high that people really have to think about quitting. That's just, it's not impeding on your rights to choose smoking. It's an impediment on, it's encouraging you to stop. It's telling you that you should stop smoking because it's like, and it's not an authoritarian argument to do good policy and sensible policy that encourages you. So it's like there comes a point where you're just being childish and acting out, and it's like it's not in your interest. And that's the thing, like with the anti-vax with COVID, right? Where it's like, well, yes, you can oppose lockdowns. Yes, you can oppose the mandates. I think a lot of people did. I did. I had a problem with a lot of the way that these things were run. I didn't like especially the weaponization of the mask cult, the weirdos that are still like living in want to put everyone on lockdowns all the time. Those crazy fuckers. Okay, now that's a trauma response too. Okay, I'm not saying that they're not like both trauma responses, but that people just reacted in different ways. But weaponizing those people in the media, like Taylor Lorenz, all those people on Twitter, all those crazy lunatics on Twitter, who were authoritarian. Okay, conflating those people with the government, who were just trying to balance lots of different needs and interests and preferences and, approaches, plus moving data and, all that sort of stuff. And that's why, that argument for an amnesty over it and just to figure out what went wrong and what can be done better next time is really, that's the only thing that I advocate for. But I opposed, I didn't want people to be forced to be vaccinated. I don't think that that's correct. I think that, but again, that just comes to my worldview, which is if politics is operating correctly and democracy is operating fairly and Murdoch is actually fucking run out of town and not allowed to exert the power that he does, which is, Kevin Rudd's, like trying to get rid of fucking Murdoch's power in this country he's an insidious force. Okay. It's not a coincidence that Murdoch and Fox are successful in the United States. Okay. Because it's fairly normal for their media to do this, but here it's like he's an absolute pox on this world, right? I joked on Twitter. I said, I wish he'd take a fucking leaf from Logan Roy and die. It's like, even Logan Roy took the hint. Yeah, and it's a little bit, and again, I understand, but yeah, so Matt said, I have a colleague who still wears masks and carries a huge air purifier into meeting rooms, but I respect his right to do so. And I also, absolutely, and the thing is, like, I live in a fairly immunocompromised family, okay? My Paul's on the bub, that shit. Matt, you're immunocompromised, right? And so I also understand that, but I also understand that that level of paranoia is probably not healthy. I think that person might need some proportion and a sense of, like whatever. I think that that's a very good sign that they're not doing so great, and that you might want to say, okay, how you doing? What media are you looking at? Okay, you're all right. Not in a, it doesn't mean that you can, and that's the problem, is that you've got these sort of online tribes that are sort of doubled down and at war with each other, when most people are just empathetic to the fact that people have handled this in different ways, and some are freaking out and some are like, but the role that the media that they consume plays a big part of that, right? Do you know what's funny is that neither me or Paul have had COVID yet. We haven't had it yet. I haven't, I'm not anti-vax. I'm just ADD. I forgot. I didn't get my fourth. I got the 3 and I got 1 booster and then the 4th, but I still haven't gotten it. Like Paul's had a flu, but this last couple of weeks, but it wasn't COVID. He's been, he's had a normal flu, but we don't normally get those things, right? My health has never been better except for breaking legs, losing teeth. Yeah. Well, I tend to die on my terms. It's not so much foreign agents like COVID and colds and flu. I don't tend to get those. My body just likes to try and kill me itself every few years. So it's my pancreas is doing what COVID should be doing. Anyway, but it's like pancreatitis has its own fucking fun. It's great. I love it. But anyway, so it's what was I going to say? No, but what was my point? Oh, yeah, but the COVID stuff, but the messaging around that stuff was, you saw the Rebel News stuff, like that Avi guy and the Australia Has Fallen stuff, and Tim Pool going off like Australia's fallen. It's like, dude, they're pictures of dongers. That's a luxury mining camp. What the fuck are you talking about? And the way that they just, they turn it into an us versus them culture war, because their agenda is to get you to not engage with the democratic process. And I think you need to remember that if you're watching any kind of online political commentary and their answers are not, okay, here's how you can get involved in a meaningful way, so you can do it's just content. It's just entertainment. So someone like Tim Pool, right? You could, as much as the American legal system and lawsuits is annoying, I love seeing it when people go, and Avi, right? At least he's taking things to court. At least he's doing the things in the process. He's not just sitting there talking and rallying people and getting people just mad on Twitter or mad on. That's not helpful at all. Okay, I want you to know how powerful you are, and that is that there's these mechanisms and processes that exist. And it's not your rights. Don't just sit there screaming about your rights. And I think you'll find, first of all, you don't have those rights. Second of all, that you actually do have a lot of power to go in and write and say how this shit affected you. You write to your ministers, you write to your MPs, you call them and go, and you do it in a way that they're going to listen. Don't fucking just abuse people and send death threats. Go, you know what? Like, I think that you messed up here, and here's how it impacted me, and I want you to do better next time. You have that ability to do that. That's by writing to your MP or doing something, or in the consultation process, okay? You have that power. Your power extends beyond just voting and screeching at politicians on Twitter, right? And so this is that whole dictator Dan stuff. And I think that, this leads to the gas thing. So basically, it's a stupid campaign that's been, it's just basically taken from the United States, that the government's taking your gas stoves, which is not the case, that there's no science on it, not the case, and that, the blah, 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 blah. He's coming to take you. Oh my God. This is my favorite. Induction stoves are worse because of woks. And I was laughing and I was like, so for the first time, you, One Nation voter, the person who mouths off about Asians all day, every day, Muslims all day, every day, suddenly you're very concerned about the quality of your heat when you are cooking your Asian food. Is that correct? Is that your position on this issue? It's like, okay then. All right, Pauline Hanson, suddenly very concerned about Asian food. Also, okay, facts. So they've banned gas, gas fitting in a new build, new housing. In new housing, that requires a permit, okay? So that means if you're doing a subdivision, you can't hook it up either, okay? Only new homes. It excludes commercial, okay? They're putting incentives in place for other things. It excludes established homes. If you've got a house, no one's coming to take your gas away. Also, fucking stop lying. You can barely read an article past the headlines. I doubt that you are concerned with the precision heat of Asian cuisine. You're having a fit based on propaganda and fear. You make pasta. I've seen you make fucking pasta. You don't care. Also, inductions are better anyway. I'm a cook, okay? I love to cook. And I miss my induction stove. It's far better because you can control the heat, and especially if you go hard on a really, really good stove, so much better. You can control the heat better. You can turn it up and down quicker. It reheats and cools quicker. It's got a lot more control. You're full of shit. Also, one of the ones was it's like, don't tell me that you work in propaganda and then try to propaganda me. Okay, you work in propaganda. I don't trust a word you say. Okay, which is this idea that I know it's about the ventilation. So basically, we'll move on. So it's first of all, it's established. It's only new homes, not established homes, not commercial, and also it doesn't exclude gas bottles. So if you really, 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 really want that wok, get a gas bottle and get a fucking gas hot plate and plug it in. If you really care that much, okay? So the benefits of obviously banning gas, right? So the research, and it's not just new research. This is research that's like decades coming, okay? Much like the tobacco industry, there's parallels here, which is that, and climate change and those sorts of things, which is that this has been like decades of research, and they're actually at the point where it's pretty much consensus that these are bad for you, okay? And it's like lots of, basically hang on, let me get my numbers up. What's the numbers on it? So it contributes to childhood asthma, okay? And so not only does it contribute to the development of childhood asthma through nitrogen dioxide, okay? It also increases the use of rescue inhalers. So it increases the need for for your emergency inhaler if you do. So if you already have asthma, it makes your asthma worse, okay, in children. In adults, it can make your asthma worse, and it contributes to the development and exacerbation of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, okay? It emits carcinogens, nitrogen dioxide, and benzene, okay, even when it's off. It is equivalent to basically passive smoking when off. Okay, also emissions. So it's also emissions. So it's not just, and what they'll do is they'll straw man and say greenies want to kill gas. That's a Minerals Council fucking, that's their talking point. Okay, it's not a straw man. It's an evidence-based thing, okay, which is that it also is a large contributor to climate change. In Victoria, Victoria uses a large proportion of the gas in our country. The price of gas is going up because of, demand overseas, and especially because of the war and the, pipeline, all that sort of stuff, right? And it contributes to climate change. We've signed treaties that, where we've committed to reaching certain targets. The easiest, quickest way to reach those targets is to deal with gas, right, with this policy. So it's not even about, so it's like, why, again, smoking, why are you fighting it? It's like, well, the way that we've gone through this is that there's a lot of scientific evidence that it's bad. People shouldn't use it. There's other benefits, which is that, it reaches our targets. Why, what's the problem? And they balance it with people's liberty and freedom. Okay, now you get weirdos on Twitter saying it's not far enough. Okay, whatever. There's always going to be weirdos on Twitter saying it's not authoritarian enough, it's not far enough. But the role of government, okay, and this is where, when you take the time to learn about how policies are made and how legislation passes and how all these things work, you'll go, hey, they came up with a, somewhat of a win-win situation. Now, I know I said not to trust win-win, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, so it's a no-brainer. And it's like, well, why are you fighting? My freedom. It's my freedom to kill myself. It's my freedom to fucking not have vaccination. Okay. You go off and do freedom, okay? But that's not public policy. Public policy is not based on fucking Baz's idea of freedom that he doesn't have because he's been reading Facebook. This is evidence-based and data-driven, right? And it's like, but then you get the fucking obvious like gas lobby where they're basically like, well, creating doubt. Okay, this is the doubt business stuff. Well, it's not the meat. You've lost a fucking health debate when it's like, yes, no, it's overwhelming amounts of like research that says that it contributes to asthma, if not making it worse. And then they're like, oh yeah, but that's not the case. Do you know what it does? It's actually about the ventilation in the house. So there's no safe amount of benzene. It's like, okay, so hang on a minute. So your only argument is to make people doubt the science. Okay, so that sounds tobacco-y to me. That sounds an awful lot like the doubt business. See how you can exercise these muscles and go, you're getting me to doubt the science. Now, I'm not saying you don't doubt the science. I'm saying you're not a scientist. So maybe you should trust the science more than a little, you should trust some science and especially a lot of it, okay? But these cherry pickers, they take it and they cast doubt and they attach it to other things. And I go, well, okay, well, let me change your argument then. Who has the more, like vast majority of people affected by this are poor people and young families, people who live in apartments or renters who can't actually change the. So what you're saying is that rich people should be able to have gas because it's perfectly safe, even though it's a carcinogen. But you're saying that, so what you're advocating for is also a policy that negatively impacts poor people or people living in flats or young families who live in a small house or an established old house who can't afford to renovate it. Is that okay? So that doesn't create any doubt, does it? That just cements my argument, which is that it needs to be banned for everybody. What's your point? Oh, so so this is how they do the doubt. They nudge you, which is, again, it's like that anti-vax thing. I'm not anti-vax, I'm anti-mandate. Yeah, most people are anti-mandate. But we also know that there's a pipeline between, so to speak, there's a pipeline from being anti-mandate to the far right and to fucking digging your heels in and fighting, an insurrection, for example. Okay, because you get these, it's like, these problems are difficult, okay? And if you're not engaging in good faith in the process and just screaming about your rights, well, then fuck off, But also, yeah, it's like, it helps us to reach our targets. It's the easiest way to do it. And the other thing is they're just lying and saying that people are taking away the stoves. They're not. Like I said, it's like new homes, okay? The building industry mostly support it. They go, well, thank you for the clarity. We like it. Thank you. The science, even they agree with the science, okay? But that's all just a big conspiracy too because they're in on it. They're in on it. They're all in on it. Twitter brain, you're cooked, okay? But then you've got the So their whole job is to create doubt. And the same thing with this nuclear debate is to weaponize people and use them to further an agenda that if they weren't hitting your emotional bits and pieces, or you're making you build this theory in your head. Like, it's obvious that they're using these conspiracy theories as a way to stop people from actually thinking clearly or being logical in any way, and to disengage from it all. Like, one key factor in like these cults and disinformation is to separate you from your normal networks and normal sources of information, and to replace that with new information that is like half true. Okay. And people who are intelligent do fall into these cults because, intelligent people are able to rationalize more. Okay. So that's just a normal thing. But, it's not difficult. And it's not like the science is new. This is a decade-old science, right? But, but they're also providing additional funding. So, like, no policy works in isolation. They're providing incentives and, additional, like, grants and all that sort of stuff, much like they did with solar. Obviously, I think they don't go far enough with solar, but, they're doing something. But they're giving money to incentivize people changing and switching over, okay? Because it's bad for you. When you are on the side of the thing that says children get sick and your first reaction is to say, well, ventilate your house then, I'm sorry, but you're not on the right side. You're not on the right side of this. And especially, and I've said this, like if you are going with this gas stove thing and talking about the children, you have no credibility in anyone's eyes ever again, because this is one thing that is like pretty much there's a lot of evidence to prove that this actually hurts children. A lot more than a fucking drag queen anyway. My God. Okay. And if you really, really care, you really love your gas bottle, which you don't because you just basically boil 2-minute noodles anyway. We know it. I seen you. I know what you eat. Okay. I cook. I know you don't care about that. You're full of shit. Excludes commercial for a start, so it's not going to affect the quality of your food from a restaurant. And second of all, if you really feel strongly about it, get a gas bottle because they're fine. Gas bottle outside, cook, fine, done. Problem solved. We still solve all these problems. You fucking dickheads. Okay. But you need to remember that, and it's the same thing with this nuclear stuff, right? Which is that you've got like freedom brain. You cooked. Which is that you think that your rights, which you don't have, okay? Even in America, you don't have these rights, okay? Public interest balances lots of different things and competing rights. You don't have them, okay? You just think you do. You're basically like an 8-year-old, or like those 13-year-olds are like, I've got rights. It's like, well, okay, then off you go. It's childish, okay? It's adolescent thinking, and it is just basically, well, this is how they weaponize it, right? So, look, I need to piss, but let's look at this. So this whole, and they've tried to turn it literally into, they started to call it cancel culture. Hang on, where are we? Here we go. Top gas exporters say they're victims of cancel culture. See how the narrative. Oh, the far left are trying to cancel gas and oil. I'm a victim of cancel culture, like J.K. Rowling. You see how they do it? This is funny. The woke mob has moved on from Aaron Rodgers to find something new to stuff into the cancel culture casket. That something is poor, misunderstood fossil fuel. But do you see how they like pouring gasoline, right, on these culture wars things, right? Really, like, you see how it can like affect you, right? You see how on a subliminal level and a subconscious level, if you're not exercising your critical thinking muscles, they sort of, they use their playbook to make you defend and show up to fight causes that are not causes. You're just an army of idiots that are dangerous. You're the mob. Okay, you're the one. If you're showing up and repeating these talking points from mining companies and talking about the mob, you're the mob, because your brain, your executive, you're not, your critical thinking skills aren't there. You're the mob. Okay, not the imaginary woke mob that exists on Twitter, which is mostly bots and AstroTurf PR firms and fucking people, whatever. Okay, it's content, not politics. You're the mob that they're using, and I'll show you why. So in an official submission to the United Nations, a coalition of major gas exporters decried the ongoing reductionism and cancel culture on hydrocarbons. Please pour one out for these misunderstood sources of energy that have overheated the atmosphere and put humanity at risk. The statement came in the wake of climate talks that wrapped in Glasgow on Saturday. Observer groups and countries send their thoughts to the UN during and after climate talks wrap each year. Most are pretty bland, but the Gas Exporting Countries Forums stands out for containing what it is, I feel, fairly confident in saying, the first or one of the first mentions of cancel culture in an official communication to the UN's climate division. The GECF is an umbrella group for 19 countries that have major natural gas reserves. According to the statement, they represent 70% of all proven reserves on Earth. Statement contains typical diplomatic language, heaping praise on the UK for hosting talks that featured excellent arrangement and warm hospitality, calling now a critical time for humanity in the wake of the pandemic, tick, COVID, and noting that gas has embedded itself in all important discussions. How'd you do that? Propaganda? And Twitter mobs? Okay, blah, blah, blah. So, in other words, but the statement goes off into a bizarre tangential ending that ends to the fever dream of modern life. It's great. Notwithstanding the ongoing reductionism and cancel culture on hydrocarbons, the GECF aspires to present a balanced energy transition roadmap for a constructive debate. Does that sound like fucking IDW? Oh, we must have a constructive, polite debate that includes all voices. Cancel culture. Do you see the role that these people play? Okay. So their job is to cast doubt and to be spoilers and to impede progress, not